We are running short on time. We do want to get an opportunity for our local folks to have questions asked for them. I hope you'll stick around because some of those questions might actually be something that they'll come back to you guys with, sure, as well as the McLean, New York folks. So, but I will ask if you please send me the bill numbers that if there are any bill numbers. Not quite that far yet. Okay. We're not yeah.
And what's the name of your organization?
Friends of Columbia Silver.
That's who you would address for that.
Let's do it through the gateway.
Prairieville Gateway, yeah.
Okay.
What's that?
Prairieville Gateway.
Yeah, prairievillegateway.org. That gets both organizations.
Okay.
And that's where you reached out to them originally.
Yes.
ARYBILLE.
Great presentation. Thank you.
I tried to make it Big Prairieville many times until I finally, I don't know why, but I kept adding MC in the front of it. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our panel. We don't have a lot of questions, so we'll not keep you here to the very end of the day. And if you have more questions for the panel, please submit them. So I'd like to therefore introduce Tim Reilly, who's talking to Lynn. And Tim Reilly is the newly elected supervisor for the town of Glen. He was previously the chairman of the town's planning board. And while the planning board was trying to put forth a protective solar law with a town board that was pro-developer, Tim is a farmer and was active in local activities and half moon prior to locating in Glen. Sandra Hemstreet has been the secretary of the town of Glen Planning Board for only 4 years, and is a member of a long-time local farm family who cares for many animals and is a researcher par excellence. Both Sandy and Tim have processed through proposals from solar and wind developers, listened to the practices, and tried to hold them accountable both at a planning and enforcement level. And lastly, Stella Gittle is the assessor for the town of Glen and Mohawk. She's been an assessor for 22 years. Glen, Mohawk, Root, and Charleston. She's been an assessor for 22 years. All but one of her towns have seen significant solar development and proposals, and the associated pilots and potential tax bills changes. I also happen to be married to her, so if I screw up the intro, I'm in trouble. So we have collected a few questions, and I'll ask them in no particular order. So the first one is, how come we don't hear more about agrivoltaics combining farming with solar? Why not make that a requirement?
Well, I don't really have an actual answer, but I can give you a synopsis of more of an opinion than what I think it could be. The agricultural voltaics, again, we are working with private landowners most of the time where these are being sited. Once the lease is established with the property owner, the lease is between the applicant or the solar developer and the property owner. So the property primarily remains in private hands. So in order to allow for agriculture to happen within the panels or within that footprint of the solar activity, it would also need a buy-in from the private landowner. And that would be another step that we would have to look forward to and negotiate with the private landowner. And as well, the developer of the solar project, they have a lot of, we'll say, investment in the area. And, if they have movable panels and any other kind of infrastructure, that would all have to be guaranteed to be protected. So I think it's doable. Certainly it is. But there are some obstacles that I think have to be overcome.
I would say, too, that I think it's still a relatively new technology. They're still doing research on it. So, and because of, at least most of the farms, a lot of the farms in our area, they are using huge pieces of equipment. And so in order to make it work, you've got to have something like we saw in one couple of pictures where it's high enough for the tractors to get under. And we haven't seen a lot of
this came up earlier, so, and I captured it, how would the town behave differently between a 94C and locally approved projects?
I think they're thinking, like, what is our role? What is our role in
Yeah,
that?
and how would you approach a 94C project differently from a locally,
We get to watch it 94C.
yeah. And you guys have been through this, so I thought it was a pretty good question,
Yeah.
you know, you from experiential point of view.
I mean, the community, anything that's not 94C, we have the opportunity for it to come before us, and that way, not only do we get to confirm and go through the process and review of the application, but we get to get, the community involved and get their feedback and have some influence over how it will be done. Thus far, we haven't actually, we have a project that will go through the 94C process, but we ourselves haven't done it yet. But right now, it looks like we'll have the opportunity, once that project is submitted in, as a town to comment on it, but we don't have any ability at the moment to influence it, other than the laws that we have, they will review, but it will be up to the state as to whether they accept what we have as a law or whether they dismiss it. So they've really taken any type of feedback from the community and from local legislation out of it. And I think that that's part of the concern with it, is not that communities necessarily, I mean, some aren't totally against it, but I would say we are not. But it doesn't feel very good when you know it's going to come in and you have absolutely no ability to influence it at all to ensure that it is a good thing for the community. So that's what I've seen so far.
And I think following up on that is that the local control over the applicant and of the development of these solar areas, and again, these are less than 20 megawatts, but the local control over it, we can negotiate with the applicant in certain ways that may be more beneficial to the town in that, even for the way it's constructed and the way it's situated on the properties. We have negotiated, moved the setback a little bit further than was initially required in the solar law, and through that, negotiations that they did move it back, and they rescued the way the panels were being placed within that footprint, and it allowed for a greater setback. It also allows for us to be, a greater influence when it is being developed through the process. Whereas once it goes through the 94C process, we have our solar law, we are updating our solar law currently, and however, it does have its obstacles. If it becomes burdensome, the 94C process can just say that it's too burdensome, they go to the administrative law judge, and it's kind of just rolled over. Those are really restricting things with the 94C process, that we lose that local control, and that's the real concern with many local municipalities.
And then there was another question that sort of was a follow-up on that, and it had to do with host-community benefit agreements. And have you become aware of any host-community benefit agreements, or have any of the developers who have come to talk to you done more than talk to you so far?
I have not had any discussion with host community benefits with any developer in the town of Glen. I'm not saying that it's
No,
not
I'm
out
just
there.
saying that they,
No.
give any idea of what it might look like or
No,
something like that.
I mean, we have, ConnectGen indicates that they will do one, but there haven't been any details on it. And then we do have a project in front of us right now that's wind-related, in which the company has told the public they're doing it, but the struggle that you have with it is they don't want to actually tell you any details on what those would be until after you've approved the project. And makes it really difficult to, people want to know what is it that we're getting, what is the benefit we're getting. And I understand it on the one hand, there's a lot of work involved in doing this, and if the company doesn't get an approval, then they've wasted in their minds all this work to do it, but at the same time, they don't want to come forward with any type of information ahead of time to share with people. So it's this carrot that doesn't have any actual value associated with it, and it's been a little bit problematic.
give them a conditional approval. Condition
Yeah,
is not
yes.
satisfactory to do that.
Yeah, at that point, that's where you're gonna have to go with it, but even still, it concerns people because they don't want to talk about any of it, it's very vague and flowery.
And then you need quality code enforcement, and you need, yeah, exactly. So, and I can follow Stella a little bit on that one as well, because, you know, there was talk about pilots and taxes, and arguably that would be a benefit that, that these companies would be driving too, wouldn't it?
Since New York State decided to help the assessors value the solar farms, the values that are being produced by the model that we have been tasked we must use, that the state provided us with, the values are extremely low. So a 5 megawatt farm in the town of Glen is working out to about a $600,000 value. And a 5 megawatt farm is going to cost the developer probably someplace around $12 to $14 million to put it in. And then on top of that, these developers go out, they get mortgages, and they get the incentives, they get a lot of subsidies. You will see that they have a lot of money behind them, anywhere from a 5 megawatt farm up to $28, $32 million backing them. But I'm tasked with putting a value of only $600,000 on the solar farm. Although yesterday, a lawsuit was filed by approximately 10 different towns that objected to the way this model is structured. And basically what the state said was we have to use as assessors this model, and it's using a discounted cash flow methodology, which is more of an accounting methodology for assessing, which is not in any way, shape, or form anything that we were taught as assessors. The companies like to refer to it as it's the income methodology. Well, no, not really, because the state is developing discount rates that bring these values down. And every year, as assessors, we will be tasked to go in and revalue every year, which means municipalities aren't going to know from year to year what the assessments are going to be. So it took, again, kind of like the home rule thing, took it away from the local municipalities. And a number of towns decided, well, this is unconstitutional, because assessors are tasked under the New York State Constitution to come up with the values. So this is unconstitutional. And on top of that, when the legislation was passed that said we had to use this model, it also said that the New York State Assessors Association was supposed to be involved in the creation of the model, and they were in the creation of an initial model, and then Taxation and Finance put up a second model and didn't even tell the New York State Assessors Association that they were doing it. The third model, just there it was finalized, and again, the New York State Assessors Association, which was in the legislation, was supposed to help develop it, was cut out of the whole thing. So this lawsuit was filed, and there's basically been a hold put on the use of the model for the assessors at this point. So it's anybody's guess where valuation is going to go. But if valuation remains as low as it currently is coming out, post benefits are something that everybody really needs to think about. Because the only way you're going to make up the difference that you really should be getting in your tax dollars for these solar farms is through post benefits.
Was the lawsuit filed yesterday or decided yesterday?
It's an order to show cause of a temporary restraining order. So basically, when you read through the body of this, the assessors cannot use the state model to come up with values at this point. If you have a solar farm that's currently in place and you've already valued it, that's fine, it's going forward, not a problem at this point. If you have something that was in production and you were tasked as the assessor, you had to use this model, the court has now said, nope, you can't. There are too many issues with it. Things that should happen didn't happen.
So any pilots written are standing as is going forward?
At this point, I'm going to assume, and I'm just assuming I'm not an attorney, because when they developed the model, nothing was grandfathered in. So if you had a solar farm in place, let's say it was in its 9th year of production, and you had a pilot agreement, if your pilot agreement was bringing in more money from the solar farm than it would have brought in if the solar farm had just been separately taxed, you were going to have an issue. And all of the assessors were told you need to talk to your municipal attorney. And this is the response we have from the state when these things happen. And yesterday when this happened, this came up on my email. You need to contact your municipal attorney immediately. Thank you. A lot of help. Thanks.
So, I don't know who can answer this. This might be something that our other presenters might be able to answer as well. How do I choose who provides me with power? I would like to use hydroelectric. How do I choose who provides me with power? I would like to use hydroelectric. I'll even take a shot at that one if you want. You really can't, from what I understand, unless you actually sign some sort of subscription similar to the solar farms.
There are CCA kind of things that are out there, and I've got some questions about those. But yeah, I don't know that they're that specific to say specifically hydro.
Yeah.
Some of our CCAs that are geared toward optimizing, minimizing costs. Others geared toward maximizing renewable energy. I'm not aware of anyone that can specifically
Hydro. Okay, thanks. Yes, Jay.
Green Mountain Energy in the city gives its residents a choice to select from their apartments whether or not they want their power sourced from electricity, be it solar or just regular gas. And those are the only two options they give them, and they cannot give them any information as to where the solar is sourced or what that looks like. So residents in the city have that option, but the rest of us do not.
And you still can't get down to solar as opposed to hydro as opposed to something else. Okay, thank you. And then the last question that I've gotten, prepared question on that, is there a town, and we talked about this a little earlier, I think, is there a good example of a town with a strong solar code that protects farmland and viewsheds?
I don't know of a good example. I think all towns, at least in the surrounding Montgomery County, Glen, are very similar in scope, in intent for what they want to do. There are very few that really waver from each other. We really had good communication with surrounding towns so that we were consistent. We weren't trying to dump it on the next town over. It would be nice. So I think that they're very consistent throughout the area, and we have worked collaboratively with the other towns in developing these solar laws.
How in Florida?
Well, yeah, the town of Florida has changed theirs multiple times. They've had multiple reiterations of theirs, and each time it gets a little more strict than the last time. But even they've still ended up with some trouble with some of the sites that they've got, despite some of the law stuff. So I think theirs is pretty good, but Minden's done quite a bit. Theirs is pretty comprehensive as well. But I think it was brought up earlier, one of the biggest glitches that I can see is that there was a step in of the state to say, wait a second, we shouldn't cite on ag land, so we're going to involve ag and markets, and we're going to charge you a fee in order to do that. And the solar companies are like, cool, no problem. So obviously it is not a fee of any type of significance that would be a deterrent. So what they're trying to do today is to say, if you use this land, we're going to charge you extra money. And I know the American Farmland Trust has been recommending, why not flip that around to say, we'll actually give you a bump if you don't use that land. If you go over here and use land that's not prime ag land, that way you'll get the bonus to incentivize them differently, because the upcharge is thus far not anything that they're afraid of, and I think it's because of the amount of money that they have behind them.
Glenn.
I started looking at wealthy communities versus rural communities. And one of my favorite examples ended up being was John Kerry, the presidential envoy for climate. I think that's his title. He lives in Shillmark, Massachusetts, in Martha's Vineyard. And that town zoning ordinance permits solar on one parcel in the entire town, and that is the 10-acre landfill. And so when you begin to look at all these very wealthy communities, they don't control it by law, they control it by zoning, and say it's only allowed in a certain part. And that's why your town zoning department becomes so critical when you're looking at these projects. If it's good enough for the wealthy communities to do that, it's good enough for us to do it.
So that's the end of the questions I have. If there's one or two more questions from the floor, we can take them. Otherwise, I know we need some time to break down and get out of here by 3:30. So, yes, sir.
Just a question, if you're going to follow along with using certain land, what we've had happen in our town is all the solar is clustering in one area because it's based on the availability of the power line. And we were made aware of the future solar projects. And again, they're all clustered in the same area. They're clustered in the same area in the adjoining town. And we actually put a moratorium on, so the planning board could take a look at this, signed by the town board. Take a look at this, how to, not necessarily control it, so much they're against the solar, because they're not against what the farmers want to do with their land. But it's how to control that grouping. I don't know if anybody has any other suggestions. I know I heard the one here where it says, hey, here's an extra benefit if you go and put it in these other areas, but it's based on what's available for power lines. And basically, we have 3 different ones. It seems like we have the big major ones, where it's the big high transmission lines, then it's the next ones, then it's the community solar, where they're just running across the street, tapping into the power lines. So if anybody has any suggestions or how you handle it?
I think we all need to consider decentralizing the electrical grid and not being focused on each transfer station, bringing electricity elsewhere. And I think that would spread out and not concentrate everything based in transition spaces.
But you know what happens is 5 years ago, my service says, here's the area of the map.
Right.
And that was based on what was there. National Grid's not going to be doing anything. Well, I got to tell you, that was a lie. National Grid is upgrading everything everywhere. So where 3 years ago it wasn't feasible, now it is, because the power lines, they've upgraded it. Now they have greater capacity. So the solar groups are getting around there. And they're not just leasing the land from the farmers, they're buying the land from the farmers.
Right. Yeah.
So that they have more control over what they put there. So, and some of them, they don't seem to mind that they're in this queue, waiting for availability of power lines to either get approved enough or just exactly what.
I'm going to refer to our planning professionals here. I know, like in a village setting or an urban setting, you can say, I want this section to be, 40% businesses, and if you come in and you apply to be a resident in that business, you might be denied. Is that something that could be applied in reverse as far as, the placement of solar, as he was describing?
Well, zoning in town, you can restrict any kind of activity through zoning. In a rural residential area in the town of Glen, it's allowed as a special permit. Solar is allowed. Utility scale and community solar, both allowed in a special permit. However, looking over our land use management plan, our comprehensive plan, and our solar law, we are looking to redefine the zoning to restrict it in certain areas of the rural residential areas, and that way we can control the siting of them in different areas. And we did talk about the elimination of the 1 through 4 soil groups and other discussions. He said, well, once that goes through the 94C process, that's going to be kind of kicked out or overlooked or overruled, and that it becomes overly burdensome and really not very compatible. It's far as the siting them right next to the lines, that's their optimum desire, is to get as close to those transmission lines as possible. Again, that reduces the cost of, transmission lines from further away that they have to install to get to that line that it's going to take to power.
I do think too, I mean, one thing, if it's community-based, we do have a pretty decent influence over, what the setbacks would be, or asking for some adjustments, and in terms of the visual or where it's located. But we've also found with every single project that we've done that what was initially proposed, it shrinks at each time, even if it's just an acre. Like the panels are getting better and more efficient faster than these guys can site projects. And so what oftentimes starts looking one way ends up reducing down depending on if they change the panels, if they've gotten smaller, what they're doing. And so that is another means of it, is that it might still be in the same location, but it can reduce the footprint. And that's happened all 3 times that we've cited, is they've been able to reduce that footprint because of technology advances that have occurred as the project's gone on. So that's another mechanism to ask for what's the best panel, what's the smallest panel, what's going to do your 200 megawatts but in the smallest space possible. And they have the technology. They're getting the technology better to do that. Yeah.
I guess I had a question relating to that, and also what the gentleman said, if I could. I looked at some solar proposals, and when you do the math, what I'm finding is, a density of not 4 acres per megawatt, but more like 10 acres per megawatt, as typical in this area. And I'm kind of wondering why that is. When I looked at the specific projects, I was assuming that, they're having to dodge wetlands and forested areas and so forth. But what I saw is that wasn't actually the case. They were actually plowing down a lot of the trees, and then also leaving some other pasture area vacant. And I'm trying to understand why that is. Do you think it is potentially for, as transmission lines expand, that they would be then moving into those areas that they're also leasing for future expansion? Or do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
I don't. Any future expansion, again, would have to come through, the planning process. They would have to open it back up and ask for the expansion of the permitted facility. When they do, a lot of times they'll try to get everything connected, and that's why they may have we'll say a 40-acre space, and if they're doing 4.7 megawatts, they'll have 2 adjoining 40-acre spaces. And they'll shrink it down just so that they can reduce that transmission and they can get more of the power into a concentrated area to bring it out to the substation.
The other thing too is sometimes it's the state agencies, like Ag and Markets oftentimes will review and say to them, that's not the right land to put this on, you should be moving it. And sometimes they can move the entire project, but a lot of times what they do instead is actually say, okay, well, we're too far down the road, we're going to keep it on this land, we'll shift it here or move this or do something so that we can condense it down so we're still going on this site, but we're reducing our footprint a little bit.
Well, that's also a suspicion I've had, is that, initially they're coming in with plans to show it, covering the forested areas, but they're leasing the other part too, and so the concession becomes that they just move it out of the forest.
This is such a fascinating subject, and I always say it's an octopus with more legs than we can ever count. We're going to have to cut it off here because we need to vacate the building. I'm so sorry. I know there were other hands up, I think we can all kneel outside, and I'm sure we'll continue those conversations outside. I thank you so much for coming and so much for all the support we got from local